All righty. I really wish you were able to put into the chat where you were calling in from, because I'll start it off this way. We are in Maryland. Some of us are in Maryland, and it is quite chilly. So I feel like it's just the perfect segue into today's topic. My name is Stacy Fritz, and I am one of the patient advocates for Believe Big. I am so thrilled that you all are here, and it is my extreme pleasure to re-welcome Paula Weinberg. Paula is our integrative nutritionist specializing, of course, in oncology with her company HealthSpan Nutrition. So she is going to be guiding us through this really important topic. And I say important, you'll know why in a moment. You wouldn't think that the topic of bone broth was super important by just the title, but you'll know why in just a moment. So a little bit of housekeeping before I pass the baton over. These sessions, food for thought sessions, are for educational purposes only. And what we're not going to do, I'll get the negative out of the way, is I'm going to ask you for your questions. I welcome your questions, but the questions that I can't answer for you today, and Paula can't answer for you today, are the ones that are specific to your diagnosis or a prior diagnosis. We're going to save that. It's not that we can't answer them. We just can't answer them on this session for the food for thought. We want to stay really tight to what the point of the session is, and to get you the information that you may or may not know. And the goal would be, if you have further questions about your specific situation, that you would be able to reach out to me, and I can put you directly in touch with Paula. She's also going to have some contact information at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the baton to Paula Weinberg. She's listed on the screen as Stacy Fritz. There's not two of us in the world, because the world only needs one of me. I'm teasing. And so Paula is named Stacy, but it is Paula. So please,
Okay.
welcome,
Hi,
Paula.
everybody. Yeah, it's great to be back. I'm excited today. I'm going to start sharing my screen here and kind of get us started. So we're going to be talking about soup today. And as Stacy said, on this nice kind of chilly day, it's definitely soup season. And so we're going to, get started here. Why soup? So we're all a bit overfed and undernourished these days. And there's a lot of processed food out there, fast food, and most of us have unlimited access to food, yet we're often consuming things that aren't very nutrient dense. And we already know what we eat and how we feed ourselves really impacts all aspects of our health, especially our ability to cope and thrive in the face of adversity. So the primary purpose of food is to nourish ourselves, and eating well provides us the building blocks of optimal cellular function. What we eat provides the actual nutrients that our cells use to do their jobs. So without nutrient-rich food, our cellular function becomes compromised. And when enough cells are compromised, we start to get symptoms. And as that progression happens, eventually disease will set in. So while nourishing food isn't the only answer once we're in a disease state, it's really an essential part of the journey back to health and vitality. So we've all heard the saying, let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. It's not a disparagement of modern medicine, but it's basically a tenet that highlights, that comes from, centuries old Hippocrates, that without this basis of foundation of really nourishing, nutrient dense food, the medicine really is not necessarily going to do the job. We need that foundation in place first. So let's talk a little bit about soup and its origins. Soup, cooking soup dates back to, the Stone Ages, and maybe even before then, but it looked a lot different back then. This is even probably a modernized version of ancient soup, because there's an actual pot there, and something that when soup started to be cooked, it was it's thought that things like turtle shells or other hard substances and things from animals were used to provide the earliest pots for soup. There's something really primal about making soup. I don't know if you guys ever did this, but when I was little, I played outside a lot, and I would often make soup. I'd find some kind of old pot or container in our garage, and I'd add water and dirt and sticks and berries and leaves and whatever, and make soup outside a lot as a kid. So I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I thought that was fun to do. So there's something instinctive about, making soup. Excuse me. Until recent decades, actually. So, maybe in your grandmother's era, people always had kind of a pot of soup cooking in the background. And that was the first kind of fast food, really, because this pot of soup was kind of always back there, always going and always available. And you can take that broth and then add to it whatever else you might have. And you had kind of a quick meal. It was ready to go. It was, somewhat portable. Put it in a vessel and you could walk out the door with it. Not easy to eat when you're driving for sure or anything like that. But again, this was sort of the earliest notion of a fast meal, was actually soup. And you may have even heard of soup being referred to as Jewish penicillin. Every ethnicity and culture has their version of soups that are, medicinal and cherished. And, every mother and grandmother has seen the powerful effects of feeding, a good homemade chicken soup to a family member who really needs it. So let's dive into dissecting some of the components of what makes chicken bone broth really nourishing, or any bone broth really. But today we're going to be talking about chicken in our how-to. So collagen is a super important part of bone broth, and you've probably only heard of it in the context really of either a supplement, as you see here in a big giant tub, or in your beauty products, because collagen, we all know, is part of our skin and part of what makes us have plumpness in our skin. So collagen is super important part of our makeup, and it forms a complex matrix with our bone and other tissues to give them structure and flexibility. There's up to 28 different types of collagen, but primarily there's 5 main types found in our body: hair, skin, nails, tendons, ligaments, arteries, even our eyes, and many other organs. About 90% of the collagen in our bodies is type 1, and it's found everywhere except the cartilage. It can be said that collagen is kind of the glue that holds us together. Collagen production naturally slows with age and also can be compromised when there's poor health. So in adults, how does that show up? Well, natural aging processes like sagging skin, creaky joints, broken bones. In children and younger adults, poor collagen production shows up as being injury prone and having prolonged recovery from injuries. When the body's low in collagen, it's a lot more difficult for the body to mend itself. So collagen's really important, say, for example, after surgery. And unless you're under 40, most of us have bone health somewhere on our radar. And a lot of cancer treatments are actually known to weaken bones, particularly cancer treatments that are hormone blockers with breast cancer. And that makes osteoporosis a real concern for a lot of people. How do you build strong bones that are flexible and impact resistant? A good mineral and collagen rich diet. So hard, brittle bones are easy to break, obviously, when they're met with pressure or impact. Flexible bones is what we're after, and they're much more likely to yield to pressure and resist breakage when you fall. So a good reminder of just how flexible we used to be is watching a toddler. I mean, they just bounce around and they never are concerned that they're going to break something when they fall down and do all their tumbling and all the things. So the flexibility of bone is due in large part to its collagen content. So don't be tricked into focusing too much on only minerals when it comes to bone health. They're an important part of bone health and bone structure, but that's just one component. And collagen is a huge critical one as well. And if any of you guys have children in your lives that you care for or are concerned about, collagen is super important for kids too. About half of their adult bone mass formation occurs during adolescence. So if you have any kids that are 11 to 18, they're in their prime bone building years. By the time they're 18, more than 90% of their skeletal mass has been formed. And peak bone mass is achieved around age 30 for most people. And then after that, believe it or not, bone resorption, so the breakdown of bone, starts to occur more rapidly than bone deposition, the creation of bone. So actually, once you're past 30, you're slowly starting to lose bone mass. And obviously that increases and kind of picks up speed as the decades go on, because there are other components that start to kind of add to that cascade where, there's change in hormone status later in life as well. So how does soup give us collagen? Making broth turns the skin, cartilage, tendons, and ligaments in the ingredients of the soup into a gelatin-rich liquid. So you might want to ditch that expensive face cream and really focus on nourishing that collagen from the inside out. Amino acids are another important part of bone broth. We've got proline, glycine, glutamine, and alanine. Amino acids are simply the building blocks of protein structures. So they're the individual components, and they're essential in our daily diet. You've heard of essential amino acids probably. And bone broth alone isn't a complete protein, meaning there aren't all essential amino acids contained in bone broth, but they're rich in particular types of amino acids, and these amino acids have great things to offer us. So proline and glycine, you can see here, proline's important for the creation of healthy collagen and cartilage. Those with stiff joints and skin conditions might really benefit from consuming proline and glycine. Glycine's also really important for making healthy blood, hemoglobin and porphyrin. It's also important for cellular energy. Making bile salt for digesting fats, glutathione for detoxification. It's also needed for our DNA and RNA creation. Glycine is also critical for wound healing. So our body can make glycine and to help with these demands, but often the demands of our body outweighs our intake if we're not getting enough in our diet or if our absorption is compromised. So our GI system isn't working quite perfectly, then we sometimes don't absorb enough glycine. Glycine is also a super calming amino acid. It's used to make GABA in our brains. GABA is our body's natural tranquilizer. Glutamine. Glutamine is important for gut and immune health. Most of our immune system, resides in our gut, so the two go hand in hand. The cells of our GI tract turn over every 3 to 4 days, and glutamine is the preferred fuel source for these cells. These are also the cells that get quickly impacted by any chemotherapy, those quickly, rapidly dividing cells, which are present in the GI tract. So glutamine is also important for keeping the immune system strong. The immune cells depend on glutamine as the other cells in our body usually depend on glucose. So our immune cells depend on glutamine, and it's especially important for those recovering from surgery, chemo, infection, malnutrition, and those types of things. Glutamine is made and stored essentially primarily in skeletal muscle. So ensuring adequate glutamine can also help with muscle loss if we're having that during illness, and it can boost muscle synthesis and repair. Glutamine is also another precursor for GABA, that calming neurotransmitter. A word of caution here about glutamine for active cancer patients. If you've got active cancer situation, glutamine content can be really high in bone broth. The exact amount we don't really know because most bone broth people are consuming, they're making at home. We are not measuring or able to measure everyone's glutamine content. And even on the store shelf, each batch of bone broth is probably likely a little different. So these things are not typically measured. But glutamine content in bone broth can be quite high, and it's useful, again, for the reasons we've already mentioned, for healing of the gut lining and, generally immune health as well. But glutamine can be used as a fuel source by cancer cells. And so obviously we want to be particularly careful if you have an active cancer situation. But on the balancing side of that, glutamine is found in almost all foods. So it is impossible for you to remove glutamine completely from your diet. And if you were to do so, you would really harm your healthy cells, probably equally detrimental to trying to withdraw glutamine from your diet to the healthy cells as it would be to cancer. So it's really impossible to completely avoid. And glutamine is actually used as a supplement by a trained medical professional, often when someone is going through chemotherapy, to help them recover and maintain their gut integrity. But that again, in a supplement form where it's a higher dose of glutamine, that's to be done under medical supervision. So if you're in active cancer and the glutamine content of bone broth is concerning to you, you can cook your soup for a shorter time. You can consume bone broth occasionally versus something like daily or, multiple times daily. You can avoid doing that and just have it less frequently. Or you can make something called magic mineral broth instead, and we'll touch on that toward the end. The last word of caution about bone broth for people, and this isn't specific to cancer, but in general, bone broth tends to be high histamine. So if someone has histamine issues, bone broth's probably not going to feel good for you. And if you have histamine issues, you can, again, avoid a long cook time and promptly freeze the leftovers and see if that can work for you, because histamine is like a bucket. So the rest of our lives also fill up that bucket. Bone broth wouldn't be the only thing going into your histamine bucket. Allergens in the atmosphere go into the histamine bucket. Many, many other foods contain high histamine. So this could push you over the edge if you have histamine sensitivities. So just to be aware of that. But you can always, again, kind of make a meat broth or cook your food less time, and also focus on vegetable broths instead. That's sciencey thing we're going to cover before we get into the how-tos of making bone broth. Proteoglycans, those are water-loving molecules that weave themselves around the networks of collagen in our skin, cartilage, and bone. And you've probably heard of hyaluronic acid, mostly probably, again, in beauty product kind of content, context. It's that magic ingredient that's associated with plumpness and hydration in our skin. And every cell in our body actually contains some hyaluronic acid, but it's definitely concentrated in our skin. Hyaluronic acid only lives about 3 days in most of the body and only about a day in our skin. So our body needs to make quite a lot of hyaluronic acid to keep us plump and moist and our cells happy. You can see how, because bone broth is rich in these types of, compounds, how much our body would be overjoyed to receive this on a cellular level. Last quick thing is glucosamine. Many of you might have heard of glucosamine chondroitin supplements for joint health as you age. And so glucosamine is part of bone broth. It's needed to build and rebuild cartilage. It helps preserve the discs in our spine and the synovial fluid in our joints, and it helps repair the GI tract lining. So while there's so much science to unpack about bone broth, that's not usually the fun part of bone broth talks. It's more knowing that the collective synergy that happens, the magic, the beautiful thing that happens in that pot, there's a lot we don't even know about it yet. These are just some of the things we already know science-wise about what makes bone broth so great for us, but you can really just feel it when you eat it. It's so nourishing, and you feel it on a cellular level, and it's kind of like getting a hug from the inside out. So, if you want to know a little bit more and kind of dive into the science and the how-tos and a lot about different soups and broths, these are 2 great books that really can take you to that next level and more information on that.
Paula, let me stop you for just 1 second before you go on.
Yeah.
So that was incredible information about the science behind the bone broth, and there was lots of nuggets, in terms of what kinds of support that the ingredients give us. But in your general, and I think I know the answer, but I'm just asking for some folks. We have quite a few questions coming in. If you're on the active cancering journey, is it a standard? It may not be good for you, or the benefits far outweigh the few things that you shared that caution.
Yeah. I think when it comes to whole foods, like bone broth is, and food, whole foods in general, generally the benefits of food outweigh its
Yeah.
negative consequences. And again, if it makes someone really uncomfortable, the idea that there's, high glutamine there, and that could possibly be a fuel, the stress and anxiety over that and the fear
Yeah.
around it would again outweigh the benefits of eating it. So if it makes you uncomfortable, I say, either kind of work through that by figuring out what you need to figure out about this food, whether that's actually true for you, maybe by talking to your, probably not your traditional oncologist. They might not have a whole lot to say about, bone
Bone
broth
broth.
and oncology, but certainly if you have a naturopathic doctor or an integrative oncologist, they would have a lot to share on that. And you can make a decision that's unique to you and your situation. Glutamine was, found to fuel cancer in scientific studies by Thomas Seyfried, and he did those studies in really concentrating. His studies were on brain cancer.
Mm.
So that is not to say that other types of cancer can't use glutamine, but that was his focus when he really isolated that both glucose and glutamine were really fueling the cancer in equal efforts, and he was doing them on brain cancer. So again, I think if someone's really reluctant about that, trust your instincts or work it through with your providers, and see if it's the right thing for you to do. Try it, again, as an occasional food rather than really, heavily focusing on it. And that would be kind of my takeaway.
Excellent. All right. So as we bridge over to part two, the part that I can't wait for you to share, just letting our listeners know that the resources that Paula has been so generous to share with us, I will include those in the show notes. So you don't have to write anything down. I will put the information on the bone broth, those two resources, and then what's coming next. Thank you for that, Paula. And like I said, I will have 3 or 4 questions. We'll save them to the end.
Okay, great. Now we're going to get into how to make the soup. And this was a lot easier to do, I felt like, via pictures and this way than actually making it live, because this is a process and it's not a very exciting process. Raw meat and water aren't that exciting to look at for the most part, but the whole overall process is quite fun and exciting to look at. So I thought this was a good substitute, since I don't have a, professional camera crew to kind of fast forward the boring parts. So first off, in making any soup, you got to pick the right vessel, the right size stock pot, and making sure it's made from the right metal. You don't want to avoid any pots and pans that are made with aluminum. And that's not necessarily a cancer focus. That's more a brain health, dementia, Alzheimer's focus. But in general, that's not a metal we want in abundance in our body. And so you want to avoid aluminum cookware. So you want a nice stainless steel vessel. I got this one on the left side, on the left-hand picture, from my wedding, as a wedding gift. The other one I bought myself. It's much larger, and I use that one, the one on the right, the larger one, I use that for the magic mineral broth and the vegetable broths, because vegetables are they're so much larger in mass. The amount of vegetables I have to kind of fit in there around the water to kind of make that magic mineral broth requires just a larger pot to start with. Actually, my very first, I'm going to go back, that very first slide, that's magic mineral broth as it's about to start cooking in that large pot. So we'll go back to this. Okay, so we've got the right pot, and now we're going to talk about probably the star ingredient, really, of soup that is kind of overlooked, and that's the water. Where's your water source coming from? Because if you're going to put all this effort into making a good broth and using that as medicine for yourself, you want to make sure that you're drinking something that's pure and you're starting out with a pure product. So the base of any good homemade soup is water, and you want to make sure you're getting the cleanest water possible. And for for that purpose, in my opinion, tap water is not suitable for making soup. Tap water is really high in a lot of unwanted contaminants. Sorry, my dog's making a guest appearance. So you want to eliminate that, because soup is obviously going to concentrate toxins and unwanted things because you're cooking them down. So we don't want to use that. You want to have filtered water. I have a reverse osmosis system at my kitchen sink, and that's, to me, so far the cleanest and most pure water that's easily available. And there are other water filter systems you can get that are more portable if you don't own your home and don't want to invest in, something like a reverse osmosis. But water filtration is an important piece, and getting pure water. So again, don't want that to be overlooked. The next important thing is to talk about, is selecting the highest quality ingredients you can afford. And obviously organic is the gold standard. You want to choose organic if it's possible for you to do that. That's the best route to go. So here are the components of what go into my soup pot. Literally, not all of that parsley. That's a bunch that I bought from the store. Not all of it goes in, but the rest of it all goes in. So you can see here carrots, celery, an onion, and I have a purple top turnip here. You can also use lots of other things like parsnips are great in chicken soup, and gosh, you can add in lots of other, veggies if you'd like. But these are the ones I foundationally kind of have in there to cook with. So organic celery to me is a must. It's on the dirty dozen list. And so you really want to make sure that's organic. Onions are not on the list. I tend to buy organic, but that's on the clean 15 list. So if you want to really watch where you're putting your efforts in terms of organic produce, you can go ahead and buy regular onions and peel them, obviously. If you do buy organic, you don't actually have to peel your onion. This onion skin has a lot of valuable nutrients in it. You can just wash it well and use the onion with the skin. You're obviously not going to eat the skin, but it makes for a good broth. Carrots, they're not on either list. I always buy organic. Parsley and herbs, I always buy organic as well. So meat quality, we're going to talk about that because that's super important as well. You want to get the best quality meat that you can, and pasture raised is sort of the ideal scenario. It's not easy to find that in an average supermarket. You can get these things online pretty easily these days. Polyface Farms is one reputable place. US Wellness Meats is another one. So I don't personally have easy access to pasture raised chicken. It's organic's easy to find, but that doesn't mean they're necessarily pastured. They're just being fed organic meals. So organic is definitely better. We're talking about shades of gray here. So the best case scenario is the pasture raised chickens. Organic would be the next. And kosher is probably the next best. Then conventional would be kind of at the bottom. So a reminder that you're eating not just the chicken and what comes from that in your soup pot, but you're eating what the chicken ate. And if they ate pesticide coated grains, which is typical for conventional chickens, as well as being injected with hormones and exposed to all kinds of toxins and negative things, you don't really want to be concentrating that down and boiling that down into your soup and then eating it. So you really want to get the cleanest, best source of chicken you can in order to make for a healthy soup. So I caution you against using conventional chicken, but do what you can. So what parts are the best parts of chicken? You want to get probably the best parts to make chicken soup are the parts you would least likely want to sit down at the dinner table and eat. It's the parts with lots of skin and bones and tendons and ligaments. That's what yields that really rich collagen and makes for that really rich broth. So you want lots of bones, lots of skin, and all of those things. So You can also put a whole free range chicken in with the feet. I know it's kind of not fun to think about like those kinds of parts, like going into your soup pot, but they actually, chicken feet and pig's feet make for the best, gelling. The gel is what kind of tells you the collagen content when it cools. Like if it looks like Jello when it's in refrigerated, you've got really high collagen content. And I've made plenty of soups that barely gelled, and I made plenty of soups that were super, super thick, like Jello. So it really is about not your skill as a cook, but what parts you put in and how much collagen, that there is to release into the broth. So you can use this variety here of the different parts, but the more parts that you have, like those very ends of the wing that typically get cut off, you don't even get them in the store most times. I mean, those tips, again, great things for making soup. So here's, I don't know if my video is blocking it for you guys, but hopefully you can see that picture there of the pasture raised chicken feet that you'd want to put into your soup in a perfect world. And that's from US Wellness Meats. And they sell a lot of these different types of animal products that are really high quality. So step one, really, of actual doing, I mean, we're into step 4 by my PowerPoint, but this is the actual doing part. So now you've got to take your raw chicken parts, if you're working with raw meat, and you want to rinse them off really nicely with, what doesn't really matter. Tap water is fine for the rinsing because you're not going to use that. So you want to rinse them really nicely, drain that water off. And I then take and scrape that. There's like a little yellow membrane often at the end of the drumstick. And I kind of scrape that off and before I cook it. It's probably not critical, but my mom always did that. And so I do that. You drain the tap water out, and then you can either, depending on your soup pot and how strong you are, you can either put your pot on the stove first with your raw meat in there without the water, and then pour the water in from there using some other smaller container to just pour in your filtered water. Or you can fill it at the sink if that's what you're doing and then carry it over, but it will be quite heavy, obviously, with the water in it. So keep that in mind depending on what's good for you. But I usually, this is not such a huge pot. It's easy for me to carry with the water, and my filtered water is at the sink, the same as my tap water. So it's easy for me to fill it there. Then you're just going to have the meat cover, with your water. And you're just going to add a little bit of either apple cider vinegar, whatever kind of vinegar you like. This is the kind that I like to use. And you add that to the water and you cover it and you just let it sit. Now it's sitting on my stove, but there's no heat. It's just sitting there and resting. And the theory is, and the science is behind this, that the vinegar, which is an acid, is drawing out some of those minerals from the bones that you want to have in your soup. So it's kind of helping start the activity of what's going to happen throughout the cooking process. So we're just letting it sit, depending on how much time you have, how long you want to let it sit there. It can sit there for up to an hour if you want, just resting. It doesn't have to be on your stove, but that's where I just let it sit because it's out of my way.
Paula, let me stop you for 1 second. Can
Yeah.
you just go back 2 slides just for a moment for a participant?
Yep.
Right there, hold.
Yep.
And then can you go to the next slide and hold?
Yep.
And for our listeners, please don't worry. You're going to have this recipe at the end, I promise.
Yes.
Please go ahead, Paula. Proceed.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yes. And you'll have the recording if you want to go back and kind of look at it.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. So after you let it rest, and while it's resting, this is when I do my vegetables. So, here you have them kind of all cleaned up. Again, if they're organic, no need to peel your onion, just wash it well. And same with your turnip if you're using it, or your parsnip. Same with your carrots even. You don't have to peel them. Just take a little vegetable brush, scrub them off, make sure there's no dirt on there and they're clean, but you don't have to be overly concerned with the peeling of that. Another interesting thing that I've learned since I made this PowerPoint is that whole carrots are more nutritious than cut carrots. So when you're cooking carrots, ideally, in a perfect world, you cook them whole if you're going to consume them. In this case, most of the time, I don't consume the carrots. Sometimes I do, but sometimes they're just really spent. They're just literally falling apart because I've cooked the soup so long, and I kind of like a little bit of uh not crunch for sure in my soup, but a little bit of texture left in my vegetables. So I will later when I warm up the broth or do that, I would add a fresh carrot and just let it simmer for a couple minutes, and then it's more to my liking. But you can certainly eat the carrots from your soup, but a lot of times I'm throwing them out. So I'm just getting out of them whatever they give to the broth, and I'm not actually eating the carrot from the soup. Again, not that you shouldn't do that. You are more than welcome to do that. But if you're going to eat them and you can fit them in your pot, leave them whole. They are much more nutritious that way. I also like to avoid putting in sulfur kind of rich vegetables when you're making the broth. Fine to add those later as you're consuming it, like as a meal, adding a little steamed broccoli or some cabbage or some kale. But if you put those in early on to make the bone broth and cook them for hours, it really doesn't give a pleasant overall taste and smell to the broth. There's a lot of sulfur in those vegetables, and those vegetables are great for you, but they're much better, in my opinion, added at the end. If you're going to eat them eat it as a meal, take some lightly steamed broccoli or some lightly sauteed kale or just raw kale and just warm it up in the soup and let it wilt for a minute. And that would be better than putting it in at the beginning. Mushrooms are another story. Mushrooms go great in there. Garlic, shallots, leeks, any root vegetables, those are great. Okay, now it's time to turn the heat on. So mine had been resting on the stove, and now I just actually turn the heat on. It'll take a little bit. I only put it on medium heat, which you can hopefully see there in that picture, like how big the flame is. It's not, super high. Turn on the heat. It'll take a little bit for this to come up to get to close to a boil. When you see the scum start to rise, it's not necessarily boiling then, but it's close to boiling. And so you just kind of have to, you don't have to stand over it and watch it, but you need to be nearby because you don't want to miss this step. If you turn it on and really walk away and you come back to it, it's boiling really hard. That's not great because it's going to break down some of that collagen. Instead of yielding it, you're going to kind of be already breaking it down. And you're also the scum gets kind of disintegrated instead of kind of staying at the top where you can easily skim it. It almost kind of gets disintegrated throughout the whole soup. And it's not the end of the world because you can strain the soup at the end, which I do. But in a perfect world, you're standing nearby enough, like 15 minutes later, after you turn it on, you can check on it and just see where it is. Which is why this doesn't make for a very exciting process to watch live, because all of this takes a bit of time in between each stage. So after you've brought it to a gentle boil, let me go back for a second, brought it to a gentle, when it just starts to boil, you want to turn it down to a simmer. You don't want it to be rapidly boiling. It's okay if it has a little bubble to it, but you want to just see a little bubble kind of rise up here and there. You don't necessarily want it to be really actively boiling. So skim the scum, and when you see that the scum isn't happening anymore, now it's time to go and add your vegetables that you prepped earlier. And these are the spices that I add. And again, my mom kind of taught me a lot about cooking, and I just kind of do what she has done. There's so many great ways to both perfume this great broth or flavor it with different spices. And Fond, which that's a brand, Fond. We'll get to that at the end and you'll see a picture of that. That's a great broth to buy if you're not going to be able to make it for yourself. They have so many flavor varieties, wonderful flavor varieties that you can get inspired by, perhaps experimenting with the flavors that they list on their soups. You can add turmeric, you can add sage, you can add tons of different things. This is just my classic traditional go-to. I personally also prefer not to salt my broth as it's cooking, because I use my broth. It makes quite a bit of broth when it's all said and done, and I freeze it. And I use it in very different things. So sometimes I'm making chili, or sometimes I'm just having broth as a light meal, or sometimes I'm adding it to vegetables as I'm cooking them, or some other dish. And so sometimes those other dishes already have salty components. And then you kind of lose the ability to use it and be concerned about getting too high of a salt content in your finished dish. This way you have total control. If you're using it and adding it to something, you can always salt that something as you're making it. But if you've already salted the broth and you've frozen it, you're kind of like, did I put salt in this? Did I not put salt in it? How much salt was in it? So it takes out that question mark for me. So I personally don't salt as I cook. I salt as I use it. I then leave it after I've gotten my veggies in, my spices in, and I just cover it. I walk away. I have it on simmer, my lowest setting on my gas stove. And it's not bubbling at that point for me. There's no real activity that I can see happening. It's a very gentle simmer, and I leave it there for the better part of a day. So typically I start, on a good day when I'm making soup, I start it early in the morning, and I'll start to take it apart and disassemble it probably around dinner time, or sometimes even later. So maybe it cooks 6 hours, 8 hours, 12 hours, something like that. It depends on how much flavor you want from it, the intensity you want from your broth. A shorter cook is going to give you a lighter flavor and looking broth. And the longer you cook it, the more intense the flavor, the more glutamine you'll have in it, etc. At the very end, if you have some fresh parsley and you want to add that in, that's a great way to add some more nutrients into your soup. You don't want to overdo it, because you might end up with green soup, which won't be bad. It's not something you'd have to throw out or anything, but it might not be what you want to visually look at when you think of chicken soup as green. So that's probably the very end. So once it's finished cooking, I take my vegetables out first, because they're large and kind of in the way usually, and put those in a bowl and let them kind of release the broth that they're holding in them. And I'll drain that broth back in. And sometimes I even put those veg in a strainer so that I can press them and really extract all the broth out of them. If I'm not going to eat them, I kind of destroy them and smash them. You can also, if you want, take the smashed or spent vegetables and puree them and add them to gravies or things like that. Thanksgiving's coming up. I just was watching a show the other day called The Kitchen, and they were teaching people how to make great gravy. And she was saying how she hates to use flour in her gravy. She thinks that it always kind of gives a floury taste. She purees the vegetables that she makes her broth with and adds that into her gravy. So that's a great secret and could be a good hit for Thanksgiving. So there's a lot of things you can do with those veg. If you want to eat them, obviously don't smash them, just set them aside, drain off the broth, because they will kind of puddle in broth for a little while after you take them out. And then I take the meat into a separate bowl, and it's kind of falling apart at this point. So you kind of have to scoop it out gently, because it's really, really cooked and fall off the bone, kind of cooked. So the skin is separating, the little knuckles and joints are falling off, that kind of thing. That's normal. You want to just take that into a bowl. And as it cools, I put like gloves on, because it allows me to get in there quicker and the temperature doesn't get to my fingers so easily. And you don't have to do that. And I pick off the skin and the bones and just take just the meat that I would want to eat, set that in a bowl, set that aside. You can, use it, freeze it, whatever you want to do with it. Excuse me. It's really such tender, great chicken to use in different dishes. And certainly you can add it back to your broth with veggies for a light meal. Cooling the broth can be tricky if it's not winter out, right? So we're in soup season, so it's fine. because you don't want the broth to stay hot for hours and hours and hours at room temperature. That's when you get kind of bacteria starting to kind of happen and have a party. So you want to be able to cool it kind of quickly-ish. The easiest way to do that is to pour it out of the hot metal pot and put it into like some shallow but wide kind of glass containers, whether it's one large one or a couple or whatever you have. The wideness of the bowl that you're using to cool will allow more stuff to escape. The narrower the top, the less steam escaping. So it just increases the cooling process if you have like a more shallow, wide kind of vessel to cool it in. I personally set my stuff outside as soon as I've done, separating it out, and I do strain the broth. There's a little bit of sediment that'll be at the bottom from just the bones disintegrating and the spices settle to the bottom, like the peppercorns and things like that. I'm not eating any of that. I'm not saving it. I strain it out into whatever I'm going to cool it in. I have a big like kind of soup thing that I use, and I cool it in there. And that last little bit as I'm tipping it out is kind of sludgy, it's got all that stuff. And I just it's very little, and I just kind of toss that. So you want to cool the soup kind of as quickly as is reasonable before you want it to be like room temperature before you put it into your fridge. You don't want to take boiling hot soup and put it in your refrigerator to cool, because it'll take forever and it'll raise the internal temperature of your fridge way too much. So you've got to cool it to about room temperature before you put it in the fridge. And you want to do that, in the better course of like maybe an hour. You don't want it sitting out for a really long time trying to cool it down. So I stick it outside on a little table I have, on my deck, and let the cold air do a lot of the job for me. And just don't forget about it, because you probably won't have it when you come in, because the animals, I'm sure, will enjoy it. And then, like I said, you have the meat, that's like meat that I've picked through, that you can use for another meal or another purpose. You can reserve it and use it in your broth as you eat it, whatever you'd like. But then you have some really nice, moist, tender meat. And that's a picture of the finished broth. That broth, I don't remember exactly, but it would probably cooked at least 6 hours, maybe a little longer. It's quite vibrant in color for broth by itself. I mean, you could cook it less time and have a much lighter broth. And that's pretty much, the broth process.
Paula, oh my goodness, we're like this, like we're totally going over time, and I could like
Oh,
listen
are
to
we?
for some. I just want to make sure that we leave enough time for our
Yeah.
listeners to
Okay.
ask a couple of questions. I don't think that they're terribly challenging ones, so I'm gonna put you on the hot seat.
Yeah.
You mentioned this earlier, and I just want to be able to give our listeners a go-to. One listener asked, are there substitutes for somebody who doesn't eat meat? And you mentioned the magic mineral broth. We could do a later session, of course, but where would you recommend them go to get the magic mineral? Is that something that you
Yes.
created, or is that a popular?
No, they can go to Rebecca Katz, Katz.
Yes,
She is the creator of Magic Mineral Broth.
got it.
She's a chef that was nursing her father and taking care of him, who had cancer. And she has a great cookbook. I wish I would have put it next to me. But she has a great cookbook. It's also just online. So
Great.
You can Google Rebecca Katz Magic Mineral Broth, and you'll get
I will put that, I'll put that in the show notes for them. And
yeah.
then can you go back real quick to the slide that has what the preferred bones that you mentioned to
Yeah.
use? That was the one that the person was asking for.
Mhm.
Great, thank you. And while they're taking a screenshot of that, what is do you have a recommendation for a supplement and a daily dosage of I think it was the glutamine? Nope. What food should I use? Look for in the bone broth that offers all 5 types of collagen. What food should I use to cook bone broth that offers all 5 types of collagen? was the question. Let me make sure I have that correct for you.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if that's, I don't know what, hold on. I don't know what specific types of collagen are in the meat that I've shown here.
So let me give you the correct question. I think I butchered it a little bit. This is from Claudia, and we can always answer it offline. What food should one use to cook bone broth that offers all 5 types of collagen? If I'm taking supplements, what is a good daily dosage for menopausal women? And I think we probably might want to answer that one offline if you're not comfortable with that one.
Yeah, I mean, again, what's the right dosage for the participant asking is impossible for me to know because I
Right.
don't know their health situation and their history and what other things they're taking and what their medical issues are, et cetera, et cetera. So I have no idea, no ability to really chime
Okay.
in on the right dose, but this is collagen, a
Yeah.
collagen supplement that, is available. It's
The
Vital
vital
Protein
proteins. Yep.
is a quality product. There are others that are good quality, but you want something that's coming from grass-fed animals is primary. And Vital Proteins does make, I wish I had it next to me, uh, this is collagen peptides, but it has a collagen supplement that is made from a bigger variety. This is just from grass-fed beef.
Yep.
And there are like collagen formulations that have all from different types of collagen from different sources. So I don't know if that really answers that question, but I'm not
No,
really
it did.
sure.
And I will get with Claudia offline. I think that the Vital Proteins is a great recommendation. Next one, which one is better, Paula? Is it better to make bone broth in a pressure cooker versus a slow cooker? Do you have a preference?
No, I don't really use either my pressure cooker or my crock pot. Did we even get to that slide? I don't know if we even got there. That's at the very end. I wanted to talk about salt too. Salt, that's important, but I don't know if we'll get to it. The pressure cooker and the crock pot are definitely ways you can make bone broth. I'm very type A and I like my control and I can do that much better on the stove. And that's just the way I learned to make it. It's the way that's sort of my easy go-to. I don't really have to think.
Yeah.
These would be new for me, so I'd have to like relearn how to do it. You want to again make sure for me, in my opinion, that step of resting the meat with the vinegar is
Yeah.
what distinguishes soup from bone broth. So I would want to do that step even if you're doing it in a different vessel.
Got it. And so the
You
last
have-
question, go ahead.
okay. I was going to say, you have that great link for making it in the Instant Pot that you're
Yeah,
going to.
I will mention, and I'll also put that in the show notes. But let me ask this last question from DJ. Can you please go to the slide for the hacks if you are somebody that is bone broth making is not in the cards for you?
Yes, and that
Can you
is
show?
totally fine. Yep. So here we go. These are store brands, quality brands that you can buy. Ideally, in a perfect world, the gold standard would be bone broth from grass-fed sources, pastured sources, the highest quality organic vegetables, etc. And in a glass container. That would be the
Mm,
perfect thing. Because the cartons that you see and the different, things they can have BPA linings and things that aren't great. So quality wise, these are some good brands. You got to watch with like Epic. Epic's a great brand, but sodium content is a little high in
yeah.
that, and you can't control for that. They don't really offer low sodium versions that I've seen. So watch if you're purchasing broth, what the sodium content is for not only yourself in consuming it, but especially if you're adding it to something else and you accidentally, don't realize that you're adding bone broth instead of
Right.
where you use water. And this has a lot of salt. And then you've also salted yourself. So you kind of be careful for that.
And so we're a little over, but I did want you to have a moment here about salt.
Yeah,
So
salt's
why don't you
super
touch on
important.
that and we'll
Yeah.
wrap it up after that.
Yeah. So I do not recommend, using the salt during the cooking, but you certainly can if that's in your comfort zone. These are two of the best quality salts you can buy. You don't want to use conventional Morton's table salt. That's mostly, that's refined salt, and Celtic salt and real salt are much lower in actually sodium chloride. That allows you to use less salt and build more flavor. These also retain tons and tons of trace minerals that are essential for our healthy cellular function. Again, these are trace minerals. These are not things we want in large quantities in our bodies, but the absence of them from any source can be enough of a problem because our bodies only need a tiny amount. But if that tiny amount is missing, it's still missing and not ideal. So these salts are great for giving us those full mineral content and array, and really great quality of taste and flavor, and it allows you to use less salt with more flavor.
And Paula, where would one, I will put this in the show notes as well, where would one purchase Celtic salt and real salt?
Whole Foods carries them. I'm sure they're on Amazon. These days I feel like everything's online. Last important thing to say about salt though, when you're not using table salt that's been iodized, iodine is an important mineral for health in general. And so if you switch out to using one of these salts, be aware that you may have removed your source of iodine from your diet, depending on what other foods you're eating. And I get my iodine through sea vegetables, and Celtic makes a sea vegetable blend with salt and sea vegetables. And again, a tiny sprinkle gives you your more than enough iodine for the day. But just an important thing to be aware of, because iodine is an important source of health for us.
That's awesome. Well, listen, I want to say thank you. I have missed you. This was really lovely, but I also want to tell our listeners just a couple of items. Sometimes I think because we are really in it, and you and I so much enjoy the nutritional information. Sometimes we need to remind ourselves too that folks that are listening to this unbelievably wonderful information, that making this is one option. And the thing that I loved the most that we talked about there at the end, beyond, I am somebody who enjoys cooking just like you, Paula. You and I talk about this a lot offline, but I need to remind myself that not everybody enjoys that. So the options of being able to do what I call the hack is just fine. And I very much enjoy when I'm working, have the opportunity to work as a patient advocate, is to really take the information and simplify it, which you did with all of these wonderful visuals. I want to circle back and remind the listeners, please don't take away from the conversation that bone broth is quote unquote bad for you in any stretch of the imagination, or something that you have to be making this homemade. If you have specific questions, that is why we are here. This was an enjoyable presentation to teach us if you are somebody who enjoys being in the kitchen. But Paula, you can have direct access to her. And these kinds of questions on, should I be having this or should I not be having this? These are specific to what's happening for you. So let me take away the heavy lifting and say that we have your back. Right? You can rewatch the PowerPoint, the show, the Food for Thought show. You can reach out to me, Stacy at believebig.org. I will put you in direct contact with the wealth of knowledge, Paula. And if we can kind of weed through a little bit of the noise, because the nutrition gets to be a lot, and we know that, and you all are trying very hard to do the best things for your body, and we're here to support you along the way. So my hope is that the presentation is not overwhelming and that you are inspired. And if nothing else, you had you got a bird's eye view on how it's made. And then you'll go to the grocery store and buy the healthy one and pour it into your cup and heat it in the best possible way. It was a pleasure, Paula, and I can't wait to see you the next time. Again, Stacy at believebig.org, and I will get you to Paula immediately on this topic or any of the other topics that we've presented. Thank you for spending the hour with us, and I really, really look forward to seeing you next month.
Thanks, guys. Has recording stopped?
I will stop it now.